The voice behind me and Mrs. Jones has been silenced. The legendary Billy Paul passed away this weekend at 81, following complications from surgery in Florida. He sold millions of records. He bared his soul on stage. He was an icon. But like so many others, his name has quietly faded from memory. Is this just history's oversight, or something more sinister? How many black singers, once celebrated, have vanished from the spotlight simply because they no longer conformed to the industry's whitewashed ideals? Would their legacies be celebrated today if their skin had been a different color? These are uncomfortable questions, but ones we must ask. Because behind every forgotten melody lies a story of erasure. In this video, we remember 23 black R&B legends, voices that once lit up the world, now pushed into the shadows. Watch until the end, and tell us, which of these lost legends do you believe deserves to be remembered once more? Johnny Ace, the R&B star who died because of a joke taken too far. In the early 1950s, Johnny Ace was one of R&B's brightest rising stars. His smooth, soulful voice sent waves of emotion through millions of hearts with hits like Pledging My Love. His name echoed across stages throughout the American South, a young icon whose future seemed limitless. But that promising career came to a sudden, senseless end, just days before the new year. It was Christmas Eve, 1954, and Johnny had just finished a show at the City Auditorium in Houston, Texas. Backstage, the mood was light and festive. He laughed with friends, exchanged holiday wishes with loved ones, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. But in the middle of that joy, something went horribly wrong. Johnny, known for carrying a pistol like a toy, pulled out his gun to show off. Some say he was playing Russian roulette. Others believe he was simply being careless, trying to entertain. But then, a single shot. In a flash, he collapsed, blood pooling beneath him before anyone could react. Johnny Ace died on the spot. He was just 25 years old. The tragedy shook everyone in the room, including legendary blues singer Big Mama Thornton, who witnessed it all. She later said Johnny hadn't meant to die. He was just a young man with a reckless streak, unaware of how thin the line between life and death could be. And in one thoughtless moment, that line disappeared forever. Thousands attended his funeral. His love ballads played on the radio for days. But over time, his name faded from memory, like a forgotten melody on an old vinyl record. Today, few remember Johnny Ace, not the way they should. His story is a heartbreaking reminder: genius can be fragile, and even the brightest stars can vanish with the pull of a trigger. Let his voice be a lesson. Let his fate remind us to live wisely, to value our lives, and to remember those who came before us. We can't undo the past, but we can honor it, so that voices like Johnny's aren't lost in silence. Sam Cooke, the soul legend who died with more questions than answers. They called him the father of modern soul, but Sam Cooke was more than a voice. He was a revolution in motion. With timeless songs like A Change Is Gonna Come, he didn't just sing. He gave a voice to the civil rights movement and brought black music into mainstream America. He was the first black artist to own his own record label, a bold step toward independence in an industry that wanted to control everything. But on a cold night in Los Angeles, December 11, 1964, that voice was silenced forever. Sam Cooke was found dead, naked, shot in the chest, lying on the floor of a rundown motel. The official story claimed he chased a woman inside, became violent, and was killed by the motel manager in self-defense. But nothing about it made sense. Sam was always sharp, tailored suits, smooth charm, and dignity in every step. What was he doing in such a seedy place, nearly unclothed, without his wallet, his car keys, or his signature watch? Why were his belongings missing? Why was there no real investigation, even as his friends and family screamed that this was completely out of character? Etta James later saw his body and was horrified. His face was swollen, his hands bruised, his teeth shattered. That didn't look like self-defense. It looked like a beating, a message. And yet, her claims were buried. The media moved on. The case was closed. Too quickly. Sam Cooke wasn't just murdered. He was erased. And with him, a movement lost its most electrifying voice. No one was ever held accountable. No one dared to dig deeper. In a country already trembling with racial fear and resistance, perhaps someone decided his power was too dangerous. But voices like his don't truly die. They're buried under silence, drowned by power, hidden in shadows where truth isn't welcome. Do you remember Sam Cooke? And more importantly, do you ever wonder who gets to live and who must be silenced? Joe Tex, the lonely clown the world never truly understood. He was a southern firestorm of charisma, a dynamic showman who could make you laugh, dance, and cry all in the same breath. With hits like Skinny Legs and All, I Gotcha, and Hold What You've Got, Joe Tex shook up the soul scene with his raw, gritty accent and no-nonsense lyrics. He was part James Brown, part stand-up comic, part philosopher, but unlike Brown, Joe never got the respect he deserved. Beneath the high-energy performances and witty punchlines was a man aching to be seen for who he really was. While the crowd roared with laughter, Joe often wondered, are they laughing with me or at me? After James Brown famously stole his band and the industry forced him into a commercial box, Joe started fading from the spotlight. He masked his pain with humor, but inside he felt invisible. Eventually, the stage lights dimmed for good. Joe Tex retreated to his hometown of Navasota, Texas, not as a star, but as a man searching for peace. He converted to Islam, changed his name, and turned away from the fame that had never truly embraced him. Those who saw him in town said he dressed simply, spoke gently, and spent more time chatting with children than adults. His once electric eyes now carried a quiet exhaustion. The spotlight was gone, and maybe he preferred it that way. His final public appearance was in a small country church. No band, no mic, just his voice. And when he reached the line, "Tell her I'm sorry," something broke. His voice cracked. He stopped singing, stepped down from the stage, and walked out the door. A week later, Joe Tex died of a heart attack. No headlines, no tribute, just silence. Joe Tex was never too small for the world. He was just too real. And in a business built on illusion, reality has no place. His story is a reminder. Behind the laughter, behind the act, someone might be struggling just to breathe. So next time you laugh, make sure you're not laughing at someone's pain. Because the clowns we mock today might be the souls we mourn tomorrow. Garnet Mathis, the soul who was never truly seen. He once sang a note so raw, so heartbreaking, that an entire crowd fell silent. Cry Baby wasn't just a song, it was Garnet Mathis' soul laid bare, pain carved into melody. He never topped the charts for long, but for those who live and breathe real soul music, Garnet was, and still is, a hidden treasure. Born from the pews of gospel churches, he carried the ache of the spiritual into the world of popular music, opening doors for generations after him. But after a brief moment in the spotlight, Garnet quietly vanished. There were no scandals, no headlines, just silence. He didn't crave fame. He wasn't built for the business. Bad contracts, industry politics, and changing tastes pushed him aside. He lost control of his music and watched as smoother, more marketable voices took his place. At times, he lived in poverty, drifting from city to city, looking not for success, but for purpose. In the 1980s, he tried to return. But the world had moved on, and the raw soul he carried no longer fit the polished mold of pop. The last time he was seen performing, it wasn't on a grand stage, it was in a Philadelphia homeless shelter. No spotlight, no crowd, just a wooden platform and weary souls needing comfort. And when he sang Cry Baby, the room froze. Then, slowly, the homeless stood and applauded. One middle-aged black woman broke into tears. Garnet didn't say who he was. He didn't talk about the past. He simply stepped down, took their hands, and stayed present in that sacred, forgotten space. Garnet Mathis didn't disappear. He dissolved into the music he gave to the broken-hearted, the discarded, the invisible. He didn't need to be famous. He needed to be understood. And maybe the real tragedy isn't being forgotten, but never truly being seen while you're still alive. Maybe those who live the quietest lives are the ones who echo the longest after they're gone. Billy Paul, the man who refused to be silenced. Billy Paul was more than just a one-hit wonder. He was the soulful voice of resistance wrapped in jazz and R&B. With a voice like velvet and fire, he stopped time in 1972 with Me and Mrs. Jones, a sultry ballad about forbidden love that soared to #1 on the Billboard charts and earned him a Grammy. For a moment he was everywhere. And then he vanished. There was no scandal. No dramatic fall from grace. Just silence. As the years passed, people began to call him the one-song man. But what few understood was that the very song that made him famous also marked the beginning of his quiet exile. Record labels begged him to recreate the magic, to stick to safe love songs. But Billy had other things to say, songs about racial injustice, social inequality, even same-sex love. These were subjects too controversial for the mainstream at the time. He pushed forward anyway. His album Let's Make a Baby was censored. His single Am I Black Enough for You was blacklisted. The industry that once applauded him now turned its back. He didn't conform, so they erased him. In one of his last public appearances, Billy sang at a modest community event in his hometown of Philadelphia. The crowd was older now, grayer, but when he sang Me and Mrs. Jones, the room went still, just like it had decades earlier. After the show, he sat quietly backstage. No press. No entourage. Just a few fans. A young boy asked if he had any new songs. Billy smiled gently and said, "No need for new songs if people never understood the old ones." Billy Paul passed away in 2016 from pancreatic cancer. There were no headlines, no grand tributes. But he left behind something more powerful than fame. He left behind the truth of a man who never betrayed himself. He didn't disappear because he lacked talent. He disappeared because he had the courage to speak, to challenge, to not play along. And in a world built on illusion, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is to be real. Baby Washington, a voice that once held time still, now barely a whisper in history. In the 1960s, when she sang, even the toughest hearts softened. With haunting ballads like That's How Heartaches Are Made and Only Those in Love, she became the unspoken queen of New York soul, her sound tender, aching, unforgettable. Though she recorded under major labels, true stardom never came. She had the voice, the emotion, the presence, but not the spotlight. Then one day, she simply vanished, not from scandal, not from tragedy, but like mist at sunrise. As disco took over and radio stations stopped spinning soulful, slow-burning tracks, her name quietly slipped away. Her albums weren't reissued. Award shows forgot. The world moved on without her. At times, people even assumed she had died, but she hadn't. She had just left the stage. In the late 1980s, someone recognized her working in a small hair salon in Queens. Still kind. Still gracious. Still Baby Washington. When asked why she never returned to music, she smiled softly and said, "I've sung enough. People just don't remember." No bitterness. No regret. Just the graceful exit of a woman who once gave everything to her art. No one knows when she last sang in public. Maybe it was at a church service. Maybe at a family gathering. But those who heard her, they remember. And strangely, it's her quiet disappearance that makes her unforgettable. Not all legends live under the lights. Some fade into the shadows not because they failed, but because they knew when to let go. We often celebrate those who shout the loudest. But sometimes, it's the ones who leave without a sound who leave the deepest echo. And if someone once moved your soul with a single lyric, a single note, don't let their name vanish. Because even the quietest voices deserve to be remembered. Especially the ones that once sang with everything they had. Samuel David Moore, the voice that echoed in silence. He was one half of the legendary duo Sam and Dave, the fiery soul men who set the 60s ablaze with hits like Hold On, I'm Coming and Soul Man. Together, Sam Moore and Dave Prater weren't just performers, they were a force. Their voices collided on stage like thunder and lightning, electrifying every room they entered. But when the spotlight dimmed and Dave passed away in 1988, Sam Moore was left standing in a silence too loud to bear. There were no more harmonies, no more playful back and forths, just a man with a voice, but no one to share it with. He launched a solo career, but it felt like going to battle unarmed. Gone were the familiar arrangements and roaring crowds. In their place were small events, polite applause, and the quiet ache of absence. People didn't show up to see Sam Moore. They came searching for the echo of Sam and Dave. His voice, still powerful and raw, could shake the rafters. But without Dave, it was only half a storm. The audiences clapped, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They were waiting for a reunion that could never come. The final time Sam sang publicly was at a memorial in Detroit for fallen musicians. He was asked to perform When Something Is Wrong with My Baby, the song that once made America weep. But when he stepped up to the mic, the words stuck in his throat. He managed only a few lines before falling silent. Then, in a broken whisper, he said, "I used to sing this with someone. And now, there's no one left to sing it with." The room froze. Not a single breath, not a single sound. Just a legend, standing alone, not on a stage, but in a hollow space, like a voice echoing in an empty church. Sam Moore is still alive. But his music stopped the day his partner died. Not because he lost his talent, but because he lost the other half of his soul. He never wanted to go solo. He wanted to share the light, to harmonize with someone who believed in him. And that's the tragedy. Sometimes, greatness isn't meant to stand alone. Some voices are born for duets, and when one is gone, the other can only echo. So the next time we celebrate solo legends, let's not forget those whose brilliance was built in partnership. And if you've ever loved, lived, or created with someone side by side, hold on to them. Because no one should have to sing a duet alone. Ruby Johnson, a gem the world never got to see shine. Ruby Johnson possessed one of the most soul-stirring voices ever to grace the halls of Stax Records. A voice rich with emotion, purity, and promise. But her career was a tragic symphony of missed chances, shelved records, and doors that never opened. Born into an era where even the most gifted black women were overlooked in favor of more marketable names, Ruby was hailed by top producers as a hidden treasure. Yet she was never given the spotlight she so deeply deserved. Her ballads were delicate yet powerful, her voice ringing like a church bell at midnight. I'll Run Your Hurt Away is often remembered by music lovers as a forgotten masterpiece, haunting and beautiful. But the release was repeatedly delayed. Radio stations deemed her songs too melancholic. She didn't have the glamorized image that sold records. And so, her demos remained buried in label archives, as if her existence were a footnote in the vast history of R&B. By 1990, Ruby was working as a school receptionist in North Carolina. A visitor who discovered her past as a former Stax recording artist was stunned. With a soft smile, Ruby simply said, "I still sing in the bathroom at night. The sound is pretty good." There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet acceptance. She once dreamed big but learned to live small in a world that never made space for her. Ruby Johnson passed away in 1999. No tribute concerts. No headlines. Just silence. But those who heard her sing remember that voice, gentle at first, then sharp and aching, like a scratch on the heart. She didn't fail. She just wasn't seen. In a world where only the loudest and flashiest are spotlighted, how many Ruby Johnsons are left in the shadows? And if one day you hear a voice that stops time for just a moment, don't turn away. Listen. Because you might just be hearing the brilliance of a soul the world forgot to recognize. Not everyone who disappears does so by choice. Sometimes, they were never truly invited in. Chuck Jackson, R&B's autumn lover, forgotten by time. Chuck Jackson was once the embodiment of elegance in R&B, a man with a velvet voice and a gift for pouring quiet heartbreak into every note. In the 1960s, his rendition of Any Day Now became a timeless anthem of longing, making him a star among soul lovers. His delivery was never loud or flashy, just honest, smooth, and heartbreakingly sincere. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. Though Chuck was the first to bring Any Day Now to life, future generations would only recognize the versions sung by white artists who came later, artists who, unlike Chuck, were backed by the industry's full promotional power. His name slowly faded from the charts, his achievements eclipsed not by talent, but by a system that chose others to shine. Still, Chuck didn't rage against the spotlight being taken from him. He didn't cause scenes or seek headlines. He simply kept singing. He recorded, he toured, he showed up, dignified and consistent. But the world had moved on. Record labels turned him away. Crowds forgot his face. There's a haunting story from the late 1980s. Chuck attended an R&B tribute concert only to be mistaken for a stagehand. He didn't flinch, just offered a faint smile. When someone finally recognized him, embarrassed and apologetic, he simply said, "I'm not here to be recognized. I'm here to listen to the music." Years later, he stepped onto a stage one final time at a Luther Vandross tribute. Singing Any Day Now, he paused mid-verse and whispered into the silence, "I've waited my whole life for that day to come. The day people remember who sang it first." The audience fell silent. No applause, no reaction, just the weight of truth settling in the room. Chuck Jackson passed away in 2023 as quietly as he had lived. No headlines. No tribute specials. Just silence. But for those who still carry the spirit of the 60s in their hearts, he remains R&B's autumn lover, warm, understated, and unforgettable. Some artists are not born to stir scandal or chase fame. They're born to plant emotions in our hearts, soft, unspoken, and lasting. And when the world forgets them, the tragedy isn't theirs, it's ours. Gene Chandler, the Prince, now silent on his fading throne. Once, his voice made all of America sway to Duke of Earl, a timeless anthem that soared to the top of the charts in 1962. With a regal presence draped in glittering robes, a golden cane in hand, and a crown atop his head, Gene wasn't just a performer, he was the Duke. An icon of elegance. A king of R&B. But the music changed. The world turned. The timeless became dated. And the Duke, once adored by millions, slowly faded into the shadows of memory. He didn't give up. He pivoted to funk, dabbled in disco, launched his own label. But the industry had moved on. No one was looking to invest in the shine of a crown from a past era. Though he helped shape a sound that would inspire generations, his name was quietly left behind. Others found fame in the very style he pioneered, while he became a forgotten footnote in music history. One journalist recalled seeing Gene years later at a music event in Chicago. He arrived early, dressed in a modest light gray suit. No crown. No cape. He stood quietly in a corner, watching the next generation take the stage. When asked why he didn't sing, Gene offered a faint, bittersweet smile. "I've sung that song 1,000 times. Now, I just want to hear if people still remember the rhythm." There was no bitterness. No regret. Just the dignity of a former king watching the world go by. Gene Chandler didn't vanish. He stepped aside, deliberately, gracefully, refusing to tarnish his legacy with desperate comebacks or scandal. Maybe that's the highest form of artistry, knowing when to bow out, not in defeat, but in grace. So if you ever hear Duke of Earl playing somewhere, pause. Let it echo. Some songs deserve reverence, not because they're loud, but because they once stood for something beautiful. And if you're still watching this far, you're not just an audience. You're a witness to greatness that history tried to forget. What follows won't be easy, but these are the stories that must be told. Forgotten not by accident, but perhaps by design, in a world that too often chooses which voices deserve to echo and which to erase. Doris Troy, the woman the world glanced at once and never looked back. With just one hit, just one look, she captured the heart of America. Her voice was fresh air in a time when soul music was still finding its shape. That single song transformed her from a background vocalist into a rising star. But as ironic as it sounds, the title of her hit foretold her fate. The world gave Doris just one look, and then moved on. What followed was a string of opening acts, forgotten studio sessions, and delayed albums lost to the industry's shuffle. She worked with legends, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, but her name was never on the marquee. One evening in the late 90s, at a modest soul gathering in Brooklyn, Doris stepped onto the stage. There was no spotlight, no grand introduction. She sang just one look again. A young woman in the crowd leaned in and asked, "Who is she?" An older artist beside her answered softly, "She paved the way for generations of women in soul." But nobody remembers her name. After that night, Doris rarely performed. She quietly dedicated her final years to teaching music at a local church. When she passed away in 2004, her death made barely a whisper in the press. But to those who had once heard that golden voice, the name Doris Troy still lingers like a bittersweet melody. Some artists are born to shine only once. But sometimes, once is all it takes to change the course of music. And if the world forgets them, it becomes our duty to remember. Because no one who lived truthfully through their gift should ever fade into silence. Maxine Brown, the star who faded before she could shine. Maxine Brown once stood at the forefront of Scepter Records, the same powerhouse that launched Dionne Warwick to stardom. With a voice full of soul and elegance, she delivered timeless hits like All in My Mind and Funny, captivating audiences with her vocal mastery. Industry insiders predicted she'd rise to become one of the greatest R&B divas of her era. But fate had other plans. Unlike her peers, Maxine was overlooked. The label didn't invest in her the same way they did with others. There was no major marketing push, no spotlight reserved just for her. Slowly but surely, she was sidelined, relegated to a supporting role while others built their careers atop the foundation she helped lay. The press once called her the launchpad for legends, yet few ever looked back to thank her. In 1985, at a music festival in New Jersey, Maxine made an unexpected appearance at the close of the show. She wasn't the glamorous icon of years past, just a modest woman with soulful eyes, standing quietly under the lights. As soon as she began to sing, older fans gasped in recognition. But the younger crowd leaned toward each other and whispered, "Who is she?" After the performance, a young woman approached and asked for a photo. Maxine simply smiled and said, "You don't need to know my name. Just know I used to sing for people like your mother." It wasn't bitterness, just quiet resignation. A fading star speaking her truth. Maxine lived long enough to watch many of her peers receive accolades and standing ovations, while her name was too often left off the guest list. But she never complained. In one rare interview she said, "I sang with all my heart. That was enough." Not everyone needs a monument. Some of us just want to be remembered, if only for a moment, as life's quiet thank you. Harold Melvin was the heart behind the soul. The founder of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, one of the most iconic R&B groups of the 1970s. But in a twist of fate, he became the first to be forgotten. While Harold built the group from the ground up, he wasn't its lead singer. That spotlight belonged to Teddy Pendergrass. And as Teddy's fame skyrocketed, Harold's name quietly slipped into the background. Fans began calling them Teddy's Band, overlooking the man who made it all possible. Still, Harold held no bitterness. "I don't need to be in the center of the stage," he once said. "I just want to keep the band together." But when the group split and Teddy went solo, Harold was left to perform at weddings, community halls, and small-town events. His final performance was at a charity gala in Philadelphia. After his set, someone walked up and asked, "Who are you? You sound like that old group." Harold smiled gently and replied, "I am that old group, kid." When Harold Melvin passed away in 1997, the media barely noticed. But those in the industry knew the truth. He was the architect of a golden era. Maybe the deepest wound isn't just being forgotten, but being replaced in name by the very thing you created. In a just world, that wouldn't happen. But since it did, let us say his name again, with honor and gratitude. Harold Melvin, the founder, the leader, the first to be forgotten, but not by us. Major Lance, the fire that Chicago forgot. In the 1960s, Major Lance lit up the charts and dance floors as one of the shining stars of the Chicago soul movement. With infectious hits like The Monkey Time and his voice defined an era that celebrated rhythm, joy, and the magic of live music. But as the sound of soul evolved, becoming deeper, more introspective, Lance's upbeat style fell out of fashion. What once made him a sensation was now seen as outdated. Record labels stopped calling. Radio stations moved on. And slowly, the man who once packed venues faded from public memory. In 1993, a witness recalled seeing Major Lance performing at a small event, standing on a makeshift stage in front of just a few hundred people. After the show, he quietly pulled the organizer aside and said, "I used to turn down hundreds of shows because I was already booked." Now, everyone's booked, except me. Not long after, Lance died of heart disease. No grand tribute. No farewell concert. Just silence, as if the flame that once warmed an entire city had quietly gone cold. But talent doesn't vanish. Sometimes, the world simply forgets how to treasure it. And maybe the kindest thing we can do is to remember, to speak their names, to keep their music playing. Because someone who once brought joy to thousands should never be left in the dark. William Bell, the storyteller no one truly heard. William Bell was never a household name, but his songs spoke straight to the soul. With classics like You Don't Miss Your Water and I Forgot to Be Your Lover, he wrote the soundtrack to heartbreak for millions. A soft-spoken man who shunned the spotlight, Bell preferred to let the lyrics carry the weight of emotion. He never chased fame, never stirred controversy, he simply wrote, quietly and beautifully. But in an industry that rewards flash over feeling, his gentle presence was often eclipsed by louder, more glamorous voices. Though he penned hit after hit for others, his own name faded into the background. At the Memphis Music Awards in 2000, Bell was invited to perform. When he stepped on stage, only a handful of people recognized the legend before them. After his set, a young man approached and asked, "Did you write that song?" Bell smiled softly and replied, "I've lived in those lyrics longer than anyone." Then, just as quietly as he arrived, he slipped out before the show was even over. William Bell is still with us, but his golden era has long since passed. The world may have played his songs countless times, but did it ever really hear the man behind them? Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is pause and truly listen to the voices that were always there, just never loud enough to demand attention. Solomon Burke, the king without a throne. He was called the king of rock and soul. Solomon Burke, a man whose voice thundered with gospel fire and shook every stage he graced. But unlike Ray Charles or Otis Redding, he never fully captured the mainstream's heart. Maybe he was too complex, too bold, too much for a world that prefers its icons simple. His voice was mighty, his presence larger than life, and his truth too raw for the spotlight. Burke lived as both a preacher and a performer, fathered nearly 20 children, once sold his own coffin, and even held a mock funeral for himself. He was real in a world that worshipped images. And in the end, he died as he lived, on the move, on a mission. His final performance took place in Amsterdam, where he sat regally on a throne at center stage. He didn't even finish a full song. He didn't need to. Each line he sang was enough to hush the room. Hours later, aboard a plane bound for his next show, Solomon Burke passed away quietly. Just like that, a king to the end, but without a kingdom to return to. Yet maybe that's the truest kind of royalty. Not measured in charts or awards, but in the soul poured into every note, and the legacy left behind in every heart that paused to listen. Percy Sledge, the man who loved so deeply he faded into silence. When Percy Sledge poured his soul into When a Man Loves a Woman, it wasn't just a song. It was a cry from the depths of a heart that knew love and loss too well. That single track made him an overnight legend, etching his name into R&B history with a voice that felt like heartbreak itself. But after that meteoric rise, the world moved on. His later songs, filled with equal passion and sorrow, were largely ignored. New stars emerged, and Percy became known only for that one unforgettable ballad. Years later, in the late 90s, he quietly appeared at a small community event in Alabama. As the night drew to a close, he stepped onto the stage, sang one song, and walked away without a word. A witness recalled seeing him afterward, sitting alone in the parking lot. He said softly, "I still love music, but it feels like music has forgotten me." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet kind of grief, the kind that doesn't demand attention. Percy Sledge reminds us that sometimes the deepest love is unreturned. But he kept giving, kept singing, even when the applause had faded. Because maybe the truest kindness is continuing to give your heart, even when no one's listening. Irma Thomas, the queen who never left her crown behind. Irma Thomas was once crowned the Queen of New Orleans soul. A voice as smooth as sweet tea, carrying a tender southern warmth that softened even the wildest rhythms of her era. She sang with heart, not for fame. Her rendition of "Time Is on My Side" predated the Rolling Stones, but while their cover soared, her original was quietly eclipsed. Irma never sued, never protested. She simply kept singing, right there in her beloved hometown. One evening, a fan recalled seeing her perform in a dimly lit bar tucked away in the French Quarter. No spotlight, no fanfare, just Irma on a small stage with a humble three-piece band. As she closed with "It's Raining," the crowd rose in thunderous applause. Irma bowed gently and said, "I don't need to leave New Orleans to be loved." But the truth was, America never loved her enough. Irma Thomas didn't fade because she failed. She faded because she refused to sell out. She chose authenticity over applause, roots over reach. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most dignified way to live, staying true to who you are, even when the world tells you to change just to survive. Wilson Pickett, the rage machine who burned bright, then burned out. Wilson Pickett was a force of nature. His raw, thunderous voice powered R&B anthems like "In the Midnight Hour" and "Mustang Sally," setting dance floors on fire across America. But behind the electrifying stage presence was a man unraveling. His personal life was a storm, marked by violence, alcohol, and a string of scandals that slowly dismantled his once glorious career. By 2004, at a charity concert, the fire had dimmed. Pickett took the stage with sunken eyes and a weary face. His voice, once unstoppable, was shaky, off-key. He moved like a man burdened by invisible weight. After the show, an old friend recalled, Pickett turned backstage and whispered, "I'm not me anymore." 2 years later, he passed away quietly. No parade, no farewell anthem, no final spotlight. Wilson Pickett's story is a haunting reminder. Talent alone can't save a soul left to suffer in silence. Fame can magnify the pain it never heals. But despite the fall, his music still pulses with life. It still makes people dance. And maybe, just maybe, true kindness is remembering the joy he gave us, and forgiving the man who got lost in the music. Otis Clay, the soul missionary the world forgot. Otis Clay was a powerhouse of Southern soul and gospel, a seasoned artist who rose from the church pews and poured his heart into every note. His voice gave life to tracks like "Trying to Live My Life Without You," earning him a Grammy nomination. Yet, despite his immense talent, his name never quite made it onto the lists of popular legends. People knew the songs, but not the man behind them. In 2015, inside a small church in Chicago, Otis sang Precious, Precious at a memorial for an old friend. When the last note faded, he didn't leave the stage. He just stood there, silent, still, as if trying to send something deeper than words. 1 year later, he passed away from heart failure. There was no star-studded farewell, no headlines screaming his name. Otis Clay lived and died in quiet dignity, never chasing fame. Maybe true greatness is simply singing the right song, in the right place, for the right soul, even if the world isn't listening. Carla Thomas, the uncrowned princess of soul. Once hailed as the queen of Stax Records, Carla Thomas was a teenage trailblazer who lit up the soul charts with timeless hits like "Gee Whiz" and "Baby." She was one of the first young black women to carve her place in R&B history. But as the years passed and newer stars stole the spotlight, Carla's name began to fade from the headlines. At a small Memphis gig in the 1990s, she opened the show, yet her name wasn't even on the poster. After her set, an older fan whispered with disbelief, "I used to play her records every night, now I have to ask who she is." That quiet moment said it all. Rather than chase fading fame, Carla chose grace. She stepped away from the stage and began teaching music to children in her hometown. Not every legend needs to be loud. Some sing not for applause, but for the love of the music. And sometimes, the truest form of strength is knowing when to walk away, with your soul still intact. Linda Jones, the angel who sang and vanished too soon. Linda Jones had a voice that didn't just sing, it soared, wept, and haunted the soul. Her hit Hypnotized wasn't just a love song, it was a raw cry from a wounded heart that still lingers in the minds of those who heard it. But Linda's time on earth was painfully brief. Just as her star began to rise, it was dimmed forever. At only 27, She passed away from complications of diabetes just hours after performing. Her last public appearance was at a New York radio station, where a staff member remembered her sitting silently before the mic, as if she could hear time slipping away. Linda left behind a world that never got to hear all she had to give. Some voices are born to stir the soul, then vanish like a whisper in the wind. The greatest gift we can give them is to listen while they're still singing. Donnie Hathaway, the genius no one knew how to save. He wasn't just a singer, Donnie was a prophet of soul. His voice carried gospel fire and philosophical truth, wrapping humanity's deepest aches into songs like A Song for You and Someday We'll All Be Free. In a world spinning with chaos, he gave us moments of peace. But behind that brilliance lived a man tormented, battling schizophrenia, drowning in paranoia, and silently crying out for help no one truly knew how to give. In his final hours, Donnie was seen alone in the lobby of the Essex House Hotel, whispering to himself that someone was watching him. Just hours later, he fell from the 15th floor. The world called it suicide. But those who knew him best still believe he didn't mean to leave. Donnie didn't vanish. He was pulled, torn between light and darkness. And maybe the kindest thing we can do now is try to understand. Because sometimes, the greatest souls don't need the spotlight, they just need a safe place within their own minds. The voices that once healed a generation's wounds rarely got the love they gave. But they are not gone. They live in every ear that still listens, in every soul that still feels. Let's carry their names forward, not as memories, but as living legacies. Thank you for walking with us through these forgotten stories. If you believe these artists deserve to be remembered, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop the name of the legend who still lives in your heart, so their light never fades again.